They say the person who cares the least holds the most power. When Audrey sat across from her husband of 7 years, she didn't beg, she didn't fight, she didn't even ask for alimony. She just signed the papers without lifting her eyes from the mahogany table. Gavin thought he had won. He thought he was walking away with his company, his billions, and his young mistress, leaving his boring wife with nothing. But he forgot one crucial detail. Audrey wasn't just his wife. She was the architect of his entire empire. And 5 minutes after she walked out of that office into the freezing rain, a car worth more than Gavin's life savings pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down and the man inside didn't just offer her a ride, he offered her revenge. This is the story of how the woman who signed without looking up became the woman who looked down on them all. The silence in the conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sterling & Davis law firm was heavy, smelling of lemon polish and stale ambition. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the gray London sky wept against the glass, blurring the view of the Shard. Audrey sat perfectly still. Her hands folded in her lap were pale but steady. She wore a simple navy dress she had bought 3 years ago at a discount outlet, a stark contrast to the man sitting across from her. Gavin Reynolds, the CEO of Reynolds Tech, the visionary of the year according to Forbes, and for exactly 3 more minutes her husband. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus that cost more than Audrey's parents had earned in a lifetime. He sighed, a sharp, impatient sound that grated against the quiet. "Are we done yet?" Gavin asked, not directing the question to Audrey, but to his lawyer, a shark-like man named Mr. Sterling. "I have a flight to the Maldives at 6. Tiffany gets anxious if I'm late." Audrey didn't flinch at the name. Tiffany, the 22-year-old PR intern, the one who posted photos of her new penthouse on Instagram, the penthouse Audrey had spent months decorating. "Just the final signature, Mr. Reynolds," Sterling said, sliding a thick document across the polished mahogany table toward Audrey. "Mrs. Reynolds needs to sign the waiver of spousal support and the non-disclosure agreement regarding the company's proprietary assets." Gavin drummed his fingers on the table. "Audrey, come on. Let's not make this dramatic. You know the deal. You get the cottage in Sussex and the Honda. I keep the city, the company, and the portfolio. It's generous considering you haven't worked a day since we got married." That was the lie he told the world. That was the lie he had eventually started believing himself. Audrey doesn't work. Audrey just stays home. He conveniently forgot the nights in 2016 when he was crying on the bathroom floor because his code wouldn't compile, and Audrey, a mathematics PhD dropout who quit to support him, sat up for 72 hours straight to fix the algorithm that became the backbone of Reynolds Tech. He forgot that she was the one who ghost-wrote every speech, every pitch deck, and every strategy email that charmed the investors. But Audrey didn't remind him. Not today. She reached out and took the heavy fountain pen Sterling offered. "Audrey," Gavin said, his voice dripping with a faux pity that was worse than his anger. "Look at me." She didn't. If she looked at him, she might scream. If she looked at him, she might grab the crystal water pitcher and smash it over his impeccably groomed head. If she looked at him, he would see the fire in her eyes, and Gavin was smart enough to know that fire meant danger. So she kept her head down. She stared at the signature line. Audrey Reynolds. She pressed the nib to the paper. The scratch of the pen was the loudest sound in the room. She signed her name with a flourish she didn't feel. Then she flipped the page. Signed again. Flipped. Signed. "She's signing away her rights to the algorithm patent," Sterling whispered to Gavin, a smug smirk in his voice. "We slipped that clause in under miscellaneous assets. She's not even reading it." "I told you," Gavin whispered back loud enough for her to hear. "She's given up. She's pathetic without me." Audrey's hand paused for a microsecond. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Pathetic. She signed the final page. She capped the pen and placed it gently on the document. "Done," she whispered. "Great." Gavin stood up immediately, the scraping of his chair echoing like a gunshot. He grabbed the folder before the ink was dry, clutching it like a trophy. "Well, Audrey, I'd say it's been fun, but... He shrugged, adjusting his cufflinks. Good luck with the rest of your life. Try not to starve. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't say sorry. He turned on his heel, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the parquet floor, and marched out, already dialing Tiffany on his phone. Babe, it's done. I'm a free man. Chill the champagne. Mr. Sterling gathered the remaining copies. He gave Audrey a pitying look. You can take the service elevator down, Ms. Vance. It exits to the side alley. Less foot traffic. Thank you, Audrey said. She stood up. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced them to move. She walked out of the glass-walled office, down the corridor, and into the service elevator. As the doors closed, the facade cracked. A single tear escaped, hot and angry, tracking through the light makeup she had applied to hide her dark circles. She had nothing. 10 years of her life. Her intellect. Her love. All gone, signed away in a packet of papers she didn't read. Or so they thought. The service exit dumped her out into a narrow alleyway behind the high-rise. The London weather had turned from a weep to a sob. Rain lashed down in freezing sheets. Audrey didn't have an umbrella. Gavin had the driver, the umbrella, and the warmth. She had a trench coat that wasn't waterproof and a handbag containing her phone, her wallet, and an old lipstick. She walked out of the alley onto the bustling sidewalk of the main avenue. It was rush hour. Black cabs zipped by, ignoring her raised hand. Buses roared past, splashing gray slush onto her ankles. She stood there, shivering, hair plastered to her skull. She looked like exactly what Gavin said: she was a discarded wife. A woman past her prime, wet, miserable, and invisible. People pushed past her, bumping her shoulder without apology. She was a ghost in the city she helped build. She pulled her phone out to check her bank balance. $4,200. That was it. The joint accounts were frozen or transferred. The generous settlement wouldn't clear for weeks. She had to find a cheap hotel, maybe a hostel. Pull yourself together, Audrey, she hissed to herself, wiping rain from her eyes. Suddenly the ambient noise of the street seemed to dampen. The aggressive honking of taxis and the shout of pedestrians faded. A low guttural purr vibrated through the soles of her feet. A car was pulling up to the curb right in front of her. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't an Uber. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom 8 painted a black so deep it seemed to absorb the streetlights. The chrome grille gleamed like the teeth of a beast. It was a vehicle of state, of royalty, of power so immense it didn't need to speed. Passers-by stopped to stare. Cars like this didn't just stop on random corners to pick up soaking wet women in cheap coats. The rear window, tinted to complete opacity, buzzed down smoothly. Audrey took a step back, thinking she was blocking someone important's way. She looked around, expecting a celebrity or a diplomat to rush out of the building behind her. "Audrey!" A voice came from the darkness of the car's interior. She froze. The voice was a baritone, rich and textured like expensive scotch. It was familiar, but from a lifetime ago. A voice she hadn't heard in person for 5 years. She squinted into the dark cabin. "Don't just stand there soaking the pavement," the voice commanded, not unkindly, but with an authority that made her knees weak. "Get in." The rear suicide door swung open automatically. Audrey hesitated. I'm wet. I'll ruin the leather." "I can buy a new car," the man said. "I cannot, however, buy you a new set of lungs if you catch pneumonia. Get in." Driven by a mix of shock and the biting cold, Audrey ducked her head and climbed into the cavernous back seat. The door sealed shut with a soft thud, instantly silencing the world outside. The air inside was warm, scented with cedarwood and bergamot. The seats were a cream-colored leather, softer than her skin. She looked at the man sitting on the other side. He was looking at a tablet, his profile illuminated by the soft blue light. He had silver-streaked black hair cut with military precision. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than the gross domestic product of a small island nation. He tapped the screen one last time, set the tablet down, and finally turned to look at her. His eyes were a piercing, impossible shade of gray. Julian Thorne, the owner of Thorne Capital, the man Wall Street feared, the man who ate companies like Gavin's for breakfast, and once upon a time the man who had offered Audrey a scholarship to MIT, a scholarship she had turned down to run away with Gavin. "Julian," she breathed water dripping from her nose onto her lap. "Hello, Audrey," he said. He reached into a compartment, pulled out a thick plush towel, and handed it to her. "You look like hell." Audrey took the towel, burying her face in it for a second to hide the fresh tears threatening to spill. "Thank you. You always did know how to charm a girl." "I deal in facts, not charm," Julian said, leaning back and crossing his legs. He tapped the intercom button. "Simmons Drive. The Ritz." "The Ritz." Audrey lowered the towel. "Julian, I can't go to the Ritz. I have $4,000 to my name. I need a Motel 6. Julian looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You just signed divorce papers with Gavin Reynolds, didn't you?" "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know when valuable assets become available on the market," Julian said coolly. Audrey flinched. "Is that what I am, a distressed asset?" "No," Julian said. His gaze softened just a fraction. "You're a dormant volcano, and I think you're about to erupt." He opened a mini fridge hidden in the center console and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to her. "I saw the terms, Audrey. I have sources in Sterling's office. Gavin thinks he stripped you bare. He thinks he took the algorithm, the code, the future." Audrey took a sip of the water. Her hand was trembling, but she forced it to stop. She looked Julian in the eye. "He thinks that, yes." Julian studied her face, searching for something. "And did he—" Audrey slowly lowered the glass. The sadness in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a spark cold, sharp, and dangerous. It was the look of the mathematician who had just solved an unsolvable equation. "Gavin is a brilliant showman, Julian," Audrey said, her voice steady for the first time all day. "But he never bothered to learn the back-end architecture of his own system. He signed the papers thinking he got the Reynolds source code 2.0. And," Julian prompted, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "and," Audrey leaned forward, "he didn't know that 3 months ago I rewrote the kernel, the code he has. The code he's pitching to the investors in Tokyo next week serves a command limit I instituted, without my biometric encryption key, which was not included in the assets list because he didn't think I was smart enough to encrypt it. That code is useless." Julian's smile widened. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. "So," Julian said, "essentially he just divorced the only person who can keep his company running." "By midnight tonight," Audrey said, checking the time on the car's digital clock, "the servers will query for the admin key. When they don't get it, the system locks down. He won't be able to log in. He won't be able to trade. He won't be able to do anything." "And he's on a flight to the Maldives," Julian mused, "with no Wi-Fi strong enough to crack a 256-bit encryption," Audrey finished. Julian laughed. It was a rare sound, deep and genuine. "You didn't sign without looking up because you were defeated, Audrey. You signed without looking up so he wouldn't see you laughing." "I need a job, Julian," she said, dropping the bravado. "I have the key, but I have no platform. I have no money to fight him when he sues me." Julian picked up his tablet again. He tapped a few buttons. "Check your phone." Audrey pulled her wet phone out. A notification from her bank. "Deposit received. $5,000. $1,000. Sender, Thorne Capital Ventures." She gasped, dropping the phone on the seat. "Julian, what is this?" "A signing bonus," Julian said calmly. "I'm not hiring you as an employee, Audrey. I'm acquiring you as a partner." He looked out the window as the car glided through the rainy streets of London. "Gavin Reynolds wants a war fine, but he brought a knife to a nuclear standoff. Tonight you stay at the Ritz. Get dry. Get a dress. Tomorrow morning we walk into Thorne Capital and we start building the thing that will put Reynolds Tech out of business." Audrey looked at the man beside her. For 10 years she had been invisible. She had been the shadow behind the sun. She looked at the towel in her hands, then at the passing city lights reflecting in Julian's eyes. "One condition," Audrey said. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "When he crashes. When he realizes what's happening and comes begging." Audrey's voice was ice. "I want to be the one to answer the phone." Julian extended his hand. "It's a deal." She shook it. His grip was warm and firm. The car turned the corner, heading toward the luxury of the Ritz, leaving the cold, wet pavement far behind. Audrey Reynolds was dead. Audrey Vance was back, and she was just getting started. The suite at the Ritz was larger than the apartment Audrey had shared with Gavin during their first 3 years of marriage. It was a sprawling expanse of cream silk gilded mirrors and windows overlooking Green Park. But Audrey didn't sleep. She spent the first night sitting in the oversized velvet armchair, watching the rain streak against the glass. Her phone turned off. She needed to reboot her own system. For 7 years she had been a processor running a program called Gavin's Success. That program was now deleted. At 7:00 a.m., a knock on the door broke her trance. It was a personal shopper, a sharp-eyed woman named Beatrice, followed by a cart of garment bags. Julian had sent them. "Mr. Thorne suggested you might need attire appropriate for a board meeting," Beatrice said, wheeling the rack in, "and he mentioned that your previous style was muted by necessity." Audrey ran her hand over a structure of black wool. He said you were hiding Miss Vance. He wants you to stop." Audrey spent the next 2 hours trying on clothes. But it wasn't just playing dress-up. With every layer she shed the baggy cardigans, the sensible flats, the pastel colors Gavin insisted made her look soft. She felt a physical weight lifting. She settled on a tailored McQueen suit in a shade of slate gray that matched her eyes and stilettos that were sharp enough to be considered weaponry. When she looked in the mirror, the tired, pale woman from the lawyer's office was gone. In her place was a mathematician who knew the odds were finally in her favor. Meanwhile, 5,000 miles away, the sun was setting over the Indian Ocean. The overwater villa at the St. Regis Maldives Vomuli Resort cost $35,000 a night. Gavin Reynolds sat on the deck, a glass of Krug champagne in his hand, his feet resting on the railing. The ocean was a turquoise dream, but Gavin wasn't looking at it. He was looking at Tiffany, who was currently taking her 100th selfie by the infinity pool. "Babe, the light is perfect," she squealed. "Come take a picture of me." "In a minute," Gavin muttered. He felt a strange buzz of anxiety. He told himself it was just the jet lag. He picked up his phone to check the daily metrics for Reynolds Tech. He tapped the app. The loading wheel spun and spun. Connection error. "Garbage Wi-Fi," he cursed. He switched to data. The roaming charges would be astronomical, but he was a billionaire. He didn't care. He reloaded the app. System alert. Critical failure. Error code. Zobzern Aud lock. Gavin frowned. Odd lock. That wasn't a standard error code. He sat up straighter, setting his champagne down. He tried to log into the admin backend through his browser. The screen flashed red. A dialog box appeared. Administrator privileges revoked. Biometric key required. Please scan retina of A. Vance. Gavin stared at the screen. The sound of the ocean suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. A. Vance. Audrey Vance. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He dialed his CTO, Raj. The phone rang once, twice, then was picked up. It sounded like chaos in the background, shouting phones, ringing sirens. "Raj, what the hell is going on? I'm locked out of the dashboard." "Gavin." Raj sounded breathless, like he'd been running. "Where are you? The entire system is down. Everything. The trading algorithm stopped executing orders at midnight London time. We've lost access to the client portfolios. We're bleeding millions by the minute. The stock opened at $140, and it's currently free-falling to $85. "Fix it!" Gavin screamed, standing up so fast he knocked his chair over. "Override the code. Use the master key." "We tried," Raj yelled back. "The master key doesn't work. The system is asking for a secondary encryption key that doesn't exist in our documentation." "It's a dead man's switch, Gavin. It was embedded in the kernel update 3 months ago." "Who wrote the kernel update?" Gavin felt the blood drain from his face. The tropical heat suddenly felt like a freezer. 3 months ago, he had been busy with Tiffany in Paris. He had told Audrey, "Just handle the update, I don't have time for the grunt work." He had made her write the lock that was now strangling him. "Audrey," Gavin whispered. "What?" Raj asked. "It's Audrey. She locked it. She has the key." "Well, call her. Get the key. We have maybe 2 hours before the SEC halts trading and opens an investigation for fraud. If we can't prove we have control of the algorithm, Reynolds Tech is finished." Gavin hung up. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. He scrolled to Audrey's contact. Call failed. He tried again. Call failed. She had blocked him. "Tiffany!" Gavin roared, turning toward the pool. Tiffany jumped, nearly dropping her phone into the water. "What?" "You scared me." "Pack your bags," Gavin snarled, marching into the bedroom and grabbing his suitcase. "What?" "We just got here. We have a massage at 4. "We're leaving." Gavin was throwing clothes into the bag indiscriminately, silk shirts, swim trunks, his toiletries. "We have to get back to London. Now." "But there are no flights until tomorrow," Tiffany whined, stomping her foot. "Then I'll charter a jet move." Gavin stopped for a second, staring at his reflection in the villa's glass door. He looked deranged. He looked like a man who had just realized that the boring wife he discarded was actually the engine of the plane he was flying, and she had just parachuted out with the controls. Back in London, Audrey walked into the lobby of Thorn Capital. It was a fortress of glass and steel in the heart of the city. The security guard at the desk looked up, ready to ask for ID, but then he saw Julian walking beside her. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," the guard said, straightening up. "Good morning, Miller," Julian said. "This is Ms. Vance. She has level 5 clearance effective immediately. Program her biometrics." Audrey placed her hand on the scanner. A green light washed over the lobby. "Welcome, Ms. Vance." They took the private elevator to the top floor. The Thorn Capital offices were quiet, efficient, and terrifyingly serious. Analysts in expensive shirts worked in hushed tones. Screens the size of walls displayed market data from Tokyo, New York, and Frankfurt. Julian led her to a corner office that had clearly been cleared out that morning. It was next to his. "Your war room," Julian said. Audrey walked in. On the desk sat a triple monitor setup, a top-of-the-line server rig, and a single white orchid. "Why are you doing this, Julian?" Audrey asked, turning to him. "You gave me $5 million in an office. You hate Gavin, I get that. But this is personal." Julian closed the door. He walked over to the window, looking out at the skyline where miles away the Reynolds Tech building stood. 6 years ago, Julian began, his voice low, "I had a younger sister, Sarah. She was brilliant, a prodigy coder. She was working on a predictive algorithm for healthcare, something that could detect anomalies in patient data before doctors could." Audrey's breath hitched. "I remember Sarah Thorne. She died in a car accident." "It wasn't an accident," Julian said, turning to face her. His gray eyes were hard as flint. "She was driven off the road by exhaustion. She had been working 100-hour weeks for a startup that stole her code, rebranded it, and fired her 2 days before her stock options vested. She was driving home in tears, distracted, and she hit a patch of ice." Audrey felt a chill. "The startup was Reynolds Tech," Julian said. "In its early days, before you joined, Gavin stole her work. He built his initial empire on my sister's grave. I've been waiting for the right moment to take it all back. I didn't just want to bankrupt him, Audrey. I wanted to humiliate him. I wanted him to lose everything to a woman just like he took everything from Sarah." He stepped closer to Audrey. "When I saw you at the MIT gala years ago, I knew you were special. When you married him, I thought I'd lost my chance. But I kept tabs. I watched you do the work he took credit for. I watched you fade. And when I heard he was dumping you—" Julian smiled a predatory, satisfied thing. "I knew the time had come." Audrey processed this. She wasn't just a partner. She was the avenging angel for a ghost she never knew. She walked over to the desk and sat down. She placed her hands on the keyboard. "The Reynolds tech servers are currently in a loop," she said, her voice all business. "Gavin will be trying to bypass the firewall. I can see his IP address pinging from the Maldives. Desperate." "What do you need?" Julian asked. "I need coffee." Audrey said, her fingers flying across the keys. "Black. And I need you to schedule a press conference for tomorrow night. The Winter Solstice Gala." "Done," Julian said. "What are we announcing?" Audrey hit enter. On the screen, a new code architecture began to compile. "We're announcing Aura," she said. "The algorithm I wrote after I realized Gavin was cheating on me. It doesn't just predict market trends, Julian, it dictates them." The Winter Solstice Gala was the event of the season. Hosted at the Royal Opera House, it was a congregation of London's elite tech moguls, politicians, old-money aristocrats, and the sharks of finance. The dress code was opulence, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and fear. The rumor mill was already churning. Reynolds tech stock had closed the day down 40%. The official statement from the company claimed technical maintenance, but everyone knew that was corporate speak for disaster. The paparazzi lined the red carpet cameras, flashing like strobe lights. "Is it true Gavin Reynolds is under investigation? Where is Reynolds?" A black limousine pulled up. The crowd hushed. The door opened and Julian Thorne stepped out. He looked like a dark prince in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He turned and extended a hand into the car. Audrey Vance emerged. A collective gasp rippled through the press line. The last time anyone had seen Audrey, she was in the background of Gavin's photos, wearing beige, looking small. Tonight she was a supernova. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue velvet that hugged every curve with a slit that went up to her thigh. Around her neck was a diamond necklace that Julian had loaned her from the Thorne family vault stones that glittered like ice. Her hair was swept back, revealing her face severe and beautiful. Her lips were painted a dark blood red. Who is that? Is that the wife? The ex-wife? Julian tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. "Ready," he whispered. "I was born ready," Audrey replied. They walked the carpet. Audrey didn't smile. She looked directly into the camera lenses, projecting a calm, terrifying confidence. When a reporter shouted, "Ms. Vance, do you have a comment on the Reynolds tech crash?" she simply paused, tilted her head, and said, "Gravity is a law of nature. What goes up without a foundation must come down." They entered the grand ballroom. The room went silent for a heartbeat before the whispers started again, louder this time. Julian led her to the center table, the prime spot usually reserved for the biggest donor. Tonight, that was Thorne Capital. As they sat sipping vintage champagne, the doors to the ballroom burst open. It was Gavin. He looked manic. He was wearing a tuxedo, but his tie was crooked. His hair was windblown and he was sweating. He had clearly come straight from the airport. He scanned the room wildly until his eyes landed on the midnight blue dress. He stormed across the room, ignoring the gasps of the crowd. "Audrey!" he shouted. Julian started to stand up, but Audrey placed a hand on his arm. "Let me her touch," said. She remained seated, sipping her champagne, not even turning her head until Gavin was standing right over her table. "You think this is funny?" Gavin hissed, his voice trembling with rage and jet lag. "You locked the system. You stole my company." Audrey slowly set her glass down. She turned her chair to face him. The room was deadly silent. 300 of the most powerful people in Europe were watching. "Good evening, Gavin," she said, her voice cool and clear. "You look tired." Was the flight rough? Give me the key, Gavin demanded, slamming his hand on the table. Silverware rattled. Give me the encryption key right now, or I will have you arrested for corporate sabotage. Sabotage? Audrey raised an eyebrow. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply secured my intellectual property. You signed the divorce agreement, Gavin. You took the company assets. But the biometric security protocols, those are linked to the creator of the code. And since you fired the creator, well, I didn't fire you. We were married. And then you divorced me, Audrey said, standing up. She was wearing heels that made her almost eye level with him. And you made it very clear that I contributed nothing to the company. You said I was boring. You said I didn't work. So if I didn't do any work, Gavin, how is it possible that I have the power to shut you down? Gavin opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was trapped in his own lie. If he admitted she wrote the code, he admitted to fraud for years of taking credit. If he denied it, he couldn't explain why he needed her. You, he stammered. I am Audrey Vance, she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. And I am the new head of technological strategy at Thorn Capital. She gestured to the massive screen behind the stage. The logo of Reynolds Tech, a stylized R, was replaced by the sleek Golden Hawk logo of Thorn Capital. Ladies and gentlemen, Audrey addressed the room, ignoring Gavin, who was standing there like a statue of misery. I apologize for the disruption, but since Mr. Reynolds is here, it seems like the perfect time to announce the launch of Aura. While Reynolds Tech is struggling with legacy issues, Aura is live as of 10 minutes ago. It is faster, smarter, and unlike Mr. Reynolds' platform, it actually works. A murmur of excitement went through the crowd. Phones were out. Stocks were being sold and bought in real time. Gavin looked around. He saw the investors who used to fawn over him now looking at him with disgust and pity. He saw Tiffany, who had trailed in behind him, standing awkwardly by the door, realizing the ATM was out of order. He looked back at Audrey. For the first time in 7 years, he really saw her. He saw the genius he had suppressed. He saw the beauty he had ignored. And he saw the woman who had just slit his throat without spilling a drop of blood. Audrey, please, he whispered, his voice cracking. It was a beg, a pathetic small sound. We can fix this. I can tear up the papers. We can try again. Audrey leaned in close, so only he and Julian could hear. The papers are filed, Gavin. You wanted to be free? You're free. Free of the company, free of the money, and free of me. She sat back down and turned to Julian. I believe they're serving the lobster bisque next. I hear it's exquisite. Julian signaled the security team. 2 large men in black suits materialized at Gavin's elbows. Mr. Reynolds, one of them said, you're causing a disturbance. We need to escort you out. Don't touch me, Gavin shouted, flailing as they grabbed him. This is my industry. I built this. As they dragged him away, kicking and screaming like a petulant child, the orchestra began to play a waltz. Audrey didn't watch him leave. She was looking at Julian. You were right, she said softly. About what? The lobster bisque. It smells delicious. Julian laughed, and for the first time he reached out and took her hand in his, intertwining their fingers on the table. It wasn't just a business deal anymore. But just as the waiter placed the soup in front of them, Audrey's phone buzzed in her clutch. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. She frowned and pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you've won? You just made yourself a target. Gavin was a puppet. Now you have to deal with the puppeteer. X. Audrey's blood ran cold. She looked at Julian. He saw her expression shift. What is it? She showed him the screen. Julian's face darkened. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the look of a wolf sensing a trap. X, Julian whispered. Xavier Sterling. The lawyer, Audrey asked. "He's not just a lawyer, Audrey," Julian said, his grip on her hand tightening until it almost hurt. "He's the money launderer for the cartel that was funding Reynolds Tech's expansion. Gavin didn't just lose his own money tonight, he lost theirs." Audrey looked at the door where Gavin had just been thrown out. "If Gavin can't pay them," she started. "Then they come for the person who has the money," Julian finished. "Or the person who stole the key." The waltz music swelled beautiful and haunting, but Audrey no longer felt triumphant. She felt the crosshairs on her back. "We need to leave," Julian said, standing up abruptly. "Now." The air outside the Royal Opera House was biting cold, a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere inside. Julian didn't wait for the valet. He grabbed Audrey's hand, his grip iron tight, and pulled her toward the side exit where Simmons was already waiting with the engine of the Phantom purring. "Get in," Julian commanded, opening the door himself. He scanned the rooftops and the parked cars with the practiced paranoia of a man who had lived in the crosshairs for too long. Audrey slid into the leather seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Gavin had curdled into fear. "Julian, who is Xavier Sterling? Really, I thought he was just Gavin's shark of a lawyer." Julian slid in beside her, locking the doors instantly. "Sterling is the legal face of the Vanguard Syndicate. They move billions of dollars in narcotics revenue through legitimate tech companies. They invest dirty money, inflate the stock value, cash out clean, and leave the company hollowed out. Reynolds Tech was their latest washing machine." "And I just broke the machine," Audrey whispered, watching the city lights blur as Simmons floored the accelerator. "Exactly," Julian said. "They don't care about code or patents, Audrey. They care that their liquidity is frozen inside Gavin's servers, and since Gavin is useless to them without the key, they'll come for the key holder," she finished. "Simmons Route B, the safe house." Julian barked into the intercom. "Sir, we have company," Simmons replied, his voice calm but tense. Audrey turned to look out the rear window. Two black Range Rovers with tinted windows were weaving through traffic, closing the distance fast. They weren't police. They had no sirens, just an aggressive, predatory speed. "Hold on," Julian said. The Rolls-Royce, usually a vessel of silent luxury, roared as Simmons engaged the sport mode. The heavy car surged forward, pinning Audrey to her seat. They swerved onto the embankment, the Thames River a dark ribbon to their left. The first Range Rover lunged, trying to clip their rear bumper. Simmons drifted the massive car with surprising grace, slamming the brakes to let the attacker fly past, then accelerating again. Crunch. The second Rover sideswiped them. Metal screamed against metal. The heavy armored door of the Rolls absorbed the impact, but the car shuddered violently. "They're trying to box us in," Audrey cried out. "They want to run us off the road before we reach the tunnel." Julian analyzed, his eyes fixed on the side mirrors. He reached into the center console, but not for champagne this time. He pulled out a heavy, encrypted satellite phone. Code red. Sector 4. I need an intercept. Now. "Julian, are you armed?" Audrey asked, staring at him. "I am a pacifist by nature, Audrey," Julian said, his jaw tight. "But I am a realist by necessity. Down." He pushed her head down toward her lap just as the rear window shattered. A web of cracks appeared on the bulletproof glass. They were shooting. "Simmons, smoke!" Julian yelled. The rear of the Rolls-Royce vented a thick white plume of dense smoke, blinding the drivers behind them. Tires screeched. A crash echoed in the distance, the sound of one of the Rovers hitting a lamppost. Simmons took a sharp right, diving into a labyrinth of narrow industrial streets in East London. The smooth ride was gone. They were bouncing over potholes, taking corners at 60 miles per hour. After 10 minutes of silence and evasive maneuvers, Simmons slowed down. "We're clear, sir, but the car is compromised. The tracker is likely active." "Ditch it at the scrapyard," Julian ordered. "Switch to the Ghost." They pulled into a dimly lit warehouse near the docks. The Rolls-Royce, scarred and battered, rolled to a stop. Waiting there was a nondescript gray Audi sedan. They switched cars in silence. Julian took the wheel this time. He drove for another hour, heading out of the city into the dark wooded countryside of Surrey. They arrived at a gate that looked like it belonged to a Jurassic Park enclosure. It scanned the car, opened silently, and let them through. The safe house wasn't a house. It was a brutalist concrete bunker built into the side of a hill disguised with overgrown ivy and moss. Inside it was stark. Exposed concrete walls, modern furniture, and a wall of monitors displaying security feeds from every angle of the perimeter. Julian locked the heavy steel door behind them. He exhaled a long, shaky breath and leaned his forehead against the cold metal. Audrey stood in the middle of the room, her blue velvet gown torn at the hem, her diamond necklace askew. She looked at Julian, really looked at him. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't a question. Julian turned. He looked tired. The invincible billionaire facade was cracking. "I told you about my sister Sarah. I didn't tell you that when she died, she was about to go to the police. She had found evidence of the money laundering. They killed her, Audrey. It wasn't an accident. I've spent the last 6 years building a fortress so that when I finally took them down, they couldn't kill me too." He walked over to a cabinet and tossed her a clean t-shirt and sweatpants. "Put these on. The dress is a target." Audrey took the clothes. "So, I'm just bait. You used me to trigger them." "I used you to expose them," Julian corrected gently. "But I underestimated how desperate they are. I thought we had more time before the violence started. I am sorry, Audrey. I never meant to put your life in danger." Audrey went into the bathroom to change. She looked at herself in the mirror. The fear was fading, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She washed the expensive makeup off her face. She wasn't going to be a victim. Not again. Gavin had made her a victim for 7 years. Sterling wanted to make her a casualty. She walked back out. Julian was pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. "We stay here until the authorities pick up Sterling," Julian said. "I've sent the dossier to Interpol. It's only a matter of time." "No," Audrey said. She walked past the whiskey and sat down at the main computer terminal on the desk. "Audrey, what are you doing?" "Interpol takes weeks," she said, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Bureaucracy is slow. Algorithms are fast. Sterling isn't going to wait for Interpol. He has Gavin. And if he breaks Gavin—" "Gavin doesn't know the key," Julian reminded her. "Gavin breaks under pressure," Audrey said. "He'll tell them everything he knows about me. My habits, my mother's address, my old passwords. He'll give them crumbs that they can use to find us." She began to type. "You have a connection to the global banking interchange, don't you?" "Julian Thorne Capital has level 1 clearing access." Julian hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but it's monitored." "Not if I cloak the query inside a high-frequency trading burst." Audrey muttered, her eyes scanning lines of code. "I'm not going to hide in a bunker, Julian. I'm going to hunt them." Julian watched her. He saw the way her mind worked, beautiful, terrifying, and relentless. He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's hunt," he said. For 2 hours the bunker hummed with the sound of cooling fans. Audrey Vance was in a trance state, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't just a coder anymore. She was a hunter. "There." She pointed at the screen, her eyes bloodshot. "See that?" Julian leaned in. "It looks like market noise." "It's not noise. It's a heartbeat," Audrey said, her voice hard. "Every time Reynolds Tech stock drops, there's a micro-purchase of assets in the Cayman Islands. Sterling is panicking. He's moving the cartel's money to a cold storage server before the freeze hits." She triangulated the signal. "It's bouncing to a physical location, an abandoned logistics center in the London Docklands." "That's their hub," Julian said darkly. "That's where they're holding Gavin." Suddenly, Audrey's phone buzzed. A video call. Unknown ID. Julian grabbed her wrist. "Don't. They'll trace it." "They already know where we are," Audrey said. She accepted the call. The screen flickered to life. Gavin was tied to a metal chair, his face beaten and swollen, weeping openly. A hand grabbed his hair, yanking his head back, and Xavier Sterling stepped into the frame. He looked unruffled, a predator in a silk suit. "Ms. Vance." Sterling smiled coldly. "We have a simple trade. You bring the biometric decryption key to the location I just sent you. You have 1 hour." "Or what?" Audrey asked, her voice shaking slightly. Sterling held up a tablet showing a live feed of a cottage in Sussex, Audrey's mother's house. A red laser dot danced on the front door. "Or my associates pay your mother a visit. Come alone, Audrey. If I see police, everyone dies." The screen went black. The silence in the bunker was deafening. Audrey stood up, her fear calcifying into cold, white-hot fury. She walked to her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "It's a trap," Julian said. "He'll kill you the moment you unlock the funds." "I know," Audrey said. "That's why I'm not going to unlock them." She turned to Julian. "Do you have a tactical team?" "I have a private extraction unit. ex-SAS," Julian replied. "But we can't storm the place. He has hostages." "They won't need to storm it until the lights go out," Audrey said, grabbing a laptop. "I'm going in. When I plug this drive into their local server, I'm executing the Icarus protocol. It disables the cooling fans and overclocks the processors. I'm going to turn his billion-dollar server into a bomb." Julian stared at her. The boring housewife was gone. In her place was a tactician of war. He reached into a hidden compartment and pulled out a tiny earpiece and a sleek, concealable pistol. "Take this," he said, pressing the gun into her hand. "My team will be on the roof. Give the signal and we come down." The rain lashed against the abandoned warehouse in the Docklands. Audrey walked toward the entrance alone, wearing oversized sweatpants and a hoodie, looking small and defeated. 2 guards patted her down. They found the flash drive but missed the gun tucked into her waistband. They shoved her inside. The warehouse was a cavernous space. In the center stood a glass-walled server room. Tied to a chair in front of it was Gavin. "Audrey," he sobbed when he saw her. "Oh God, you came." Sterling stepped out from the shadows, clapping slowly. "Touching. Now the key." Audrey walked past Gavin, ignoring his apologies, and entered the glass room. Sterling watched greedily from the other side. She plugged in the drive. The screen flashed "Biometric scan required." She scanned her eye. "Access granted." But instead of the unlock code, Audrey typed, "Execute Icarus.bat." The servers instantly began to whine, the pitch rising to a scream. Red warning lights strobed. "System overheat. Meltdown imminent." Sterling's smile vanished. He slammed his hand against the glass. "What did you do?" Audrey turned to face him, her eyes blazing. She touched her earpiece. "Now, Julian?" The sound of the skylight shattering was louder than the roar of the melting servers. As Sterling screamed for his men to fire, 4 black-clad figures descended on ropes from the darkness above, crashing through the smoke like avenging angels. A flashbang detonated in the center of the warehouse, turning the gloom into a blinding white supernova. Audrey threw herself to the floor, covering her head as the glass walls of the server room exploded outward. The heat was already suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on her lungs. The Icarus protocol was working too well. The lithium batteries in the server racks were catching fire, turning the glass cage into a furnace. Clear right, clear left. The tactical team hit the ground, their suppressed weapons coughing rhythmically. Sterling's guards, blinded and disoriented, dropped before they could even raise their rifles. But Xavier Sterling wasn't looking at the soldiers. He was looking at his burning fortune. He saw the servers smoking, destroying the only leverage he had over the cartel. With a howl of pure animalistic rage, he lunged toward the shattered glass, a silver pistol in his hand. He didn't care about escaping. He only wanted to kill the woman who had ruined him. "You witch!" Sterling screamed, raising the gun at Audrey's prone figure. Audrey looked up, coughing, and saw the black bore of the barrel. She froze. "No!" The scream came from Gavin. Tied to the metal chair, beaten and exhausted, he summoned a final burst of desperate strength. He threw his body weight to the side, tipping the heavy chair over and crashing into Sterling's legs just as the trigger clicked. The shot went wild, pinging off a steel beam. Sterling stumbled, kicking Gavin viciously in the ribs. "Get off me, you pathetic worm!" It was the distraction they needed. Julian Thorne emerged from the smoke. He didn't use a weapon. He tackled Sterling with the force of a freight train, driving him into the concrete floor. The gun skittered away. Julian rained blows down on the lawyer's face, each strike heavy with 6 years of grief for his sister. "That's for Sarah!" Julian roared, landing a final brutal cross that knocked Sterling cold. "Secure him!" the team leader shouted. "The structure is compromised. We have to move." The fire was climbing the walls now. The air was thick with toxic black smoke. Julian scrambled up and rushed to Audrey, pulling her into his arms. "I've got you," he choked out, shielding her face with his jacket. "We're leaving." Audrey grabbed his arm. "Gavin, we can't leave him." Julian looked down. Gavin was lying on his side, still tied to the toppled chair, wheezing in the smoke. "Cut him loose," Julian ordered his nearest operative. The soldier sliced the ropes. Gavin slumped to the floor, barely conscious. Julian's men grabbed him, dragging him toward the exit. They burst out into the cold, rainy London night just as the warehouse roof collapsed behind them with a dull, thunderous boom. Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue lights flashed against the wet pavement as police and paramedics, tipped off by Audrey's earlier signal, swarmed the scene. Audrey stood in the rain, shivering as the adrenaline crashed. Julian wrapped his ruined jacket around her, holding her tight. "It's over," he whispered. Paramedics loaded Gavin onto a stretcher. Before they closed the doors, he looked at Audrey. His face was swollen, his tuxedo destroyed. "You were amazing," Gavin whispered, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry, Audrey, for everything." "I know," Audrey said softly. She reached out and touched his hand, a gesture of pity, not love. "You're free now, Gavin. No company, no money, just a second chance. Don't waste it." The ambulance drove away. Audrey turned back to Julian. He stood under the street lamp, bruised and wet, looking at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "I don't have a home," she replied. "Gavin has the penthouse." Julian smiled, wiping soot from her cheek. "Home isn't a place, Audrey. It's the people who see you when you're looking down and help you look up." He kissed her forehead. "Let's go home." 1 year later. The morning sun glinted off the glass facade of the newly christened Vance and Thorne Tower. Inside the top-floor office, Audrey Vance stood looking out over London. She looked different. The timid woman in the beige cardigan was gone. In her place was the CEO of the world's leading ethical AI firm, wearing a sharp white suit and a smile that could cut glass. "Dr. Vance." Her assistant poked his head in. "The board is ready, and your mother called. She wants to know if you're bringing that handsome Julian to Sunday roast." Audrey laughed. "Tell her yes, and tell the board I'm coming." Julian walked in a moment later, holding a small velvet box. He wasn't just her partner in business, he was her partner in everything. "Nervous about the speech?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "I spent 7 years silent. Sometimes it's hard to remember I have the microphone." "You're the main event now," Julian said. He opened the box. Inside was a sleek silver fountain pen engraved with a date. The date she signed the divorce papers. "Why this date?" she asked. "Because that was the day you stopped looking down," Julian said softly. "Use this to sign the merger today. Sign your own name, Audrey." Audrey took the pen. She felt the weight of it, the history, the pain, and the victory. Gavin was teaching math in Manchester, living a quiet, humble life. Sterling was serving 3 life sentences. And Audrey, she was exactly where she belonged. "Ready?" Julian asked, offering his arm. Audrey clipped the pen to her lapel and took his hand. "I've been waiting my whole life." Together they walked out of the office and into the light. And that is the story of Audrey Vance. She started as the woman who signed away her life without looking up and ended as the woman the whole world looks up to. Gavin learned the hard way that you never mistreat the architect of your success, and Julian proved that true power isn't about control, it's about empowering the people you love. What did you think of Gavin's ending? Did he deserve a second chance, or should he have ended up in a cell next to Sterling? And would you have the strength to forgive him like Audrey did? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It helps the channel grow so we can bring you more epic sagas. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, remember, know your worth and never ever look down.
They thought she was weak because she was quiet. They thought she was stupid because she was kind. But in the high-stakes world of corporate divorce, silence isn't weakness, it's a strategy. When Marcus Thorne dragged his shy wife into court to strip her of every penny, he brought his mistress Jessica along to enjoy the show. Jessica laughed at the wife's trembling hands, sneering that she wasn't woman enough to keep a CEO. But neither of them knew the terrifying truth buried in the financial disclosures. Marcus didn't just work for a company. He worked for her company. And the gavel was about to drop on the most brutal reality check of their lives. The fluorescent lights of the Superior Court of Delaware hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to grate against Mira Vance's temples. The air inside courtroom 4B smelled of floor wax and old paper, a sterile scent that did little to mask the stench of a marriage rotting from the inside out. Mira sat at the defendant's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple charcoal grey dress off the rack, unpretentious and intentionally dull. Her hair was pulled back in a severe low bun, and she kept her gaze fixed on the mahogany grain of the table. To the casual observer, she looked defeated, broken. A woman who had been discarded and was now waiting for the final sweep of the broom. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. Marcus Thorne, her husband of 6 years, sat sprawled in his chair, radiating the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit, the navy fabric shimmering slightly under the lights. He checked his Rolex Submariner every 30 seconds, tapping his fingers against his briefcase. He was the regional director of Stratton Dynamics, a logistics firm that had seen a meteoric rise in the last 3 years. He was handsome, successful, and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. But it was the woman sitting in the first row of the public gallery who drew the most attention. Jessica Miller. She was 26, 10 years younger than Mira, and she made sure everyone knew it. She wasn't just the mistress, she was the replacement. She wore a bright crimson blazer that violated every unspoken rule of courtroom decorum. Her lips painted a matching shade of aggressive red. She leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand, watching Mira with a look of predatory amusement. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Arthur Pendleton said, his voice gruff as he shuffled through the thick stack of filings. "We are here to determine the preliminary division of assets and discuss the validity of the prenuptial agreement challenge. Your counsel may proceed." Marcus's lawyer, Clifford Sneed, stood up. Sneed was known in the city as a bulldog, a man who charged $800 an hour to eviscerate species. He adjusted his tie and smirked at Mira. "Your Honor." Sneed began, his voice smooth and oily. "My client, Mr. Thorne, has been the sole provider for this household for the entirety of the marriage. He has built his career at Stratton Dynamics through blood, sweat, and tears. He has worked 80-hour weeks while Mrs. Vance, well, frankly, Mrs. Vance, stayed home." Mira didn't flinch. She didn't look up. Sneed continued pacing the floor. Mrs. Vance claims entitlement to half of Mr. Thorne's stock options and his performance bonuses. We find this laughable. She has contributed nothing to the household finances. She has no career, no public standing, and played no role in my client's corporate ascent. In fact, her social anxiety and refusal to attend industry events were a liability to Mr. Thorne's career. In the gallery, Jessica let out a short, audible scoff. It was loud enough to echo. When a few heads turned, she didn't apologize. She simply whispered to the person next to her. "It's true. She's a mouse. It's embarrassing." "Mr. Sneed," the judge warned, eyeing the gallery. "Control your witnesses." "Apologies, Your Honor," Sneed said, barely hiding a smile. "The point stands. We are offering Mrs. Vance the townhome in Jersey and a one-time alimony payment of $50,000. In exchange, she waives all rights to Mr. Thorne's Stratton Dynamics equity and the primary estate in Greenwich." It was an insult. The Greenwich estate alone was worth $4 million. The stock options were worth 10 times that. "And if she refuses," the judge asked, "then we will prove that she violated the moral clause of their marriage by failing to support the marital union," Sneed threatened. "We will prove that her shyness was actually emotional neglect of my client." Finally, there was movement at Mira's table. Sitting beside Mira was not a bulldog lawyer. It was a man named Robert Sterling. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, wearing a suit that looked expensive but dated. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and had spent the last 20 minutes silently reading a document, ignoring Sneed entirely. Sterling looked up, removing his glasses. "Is the plaintiff finished posturing, Your Honor?" Sneed bristled. "I am stating facts." "You are stating delusions, Clifford," Sterling said softly. He didn't stand up. He just leaned back. "We reject the settlement. In fact, we are countersuing for full disclosure of assets. We believe Mr. Thorne has hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands under the shell company Blue River, LLC. Marcus froze. The tapping of his fingers stopped instantly. He shot a look at Sneed. "Objection!" Sneed roared. "This is fishing. There is no proof of such accounts." "We have the routing numbers," Sterling said, sliding a single piece of paper across the table toward the court clerk. "And we are also petitioning to subpoena the travel records of Ms. Jessica Miller to cross-reference them with Mr. Thorne's business trips to Zurich and Milan." Jessica's smirk vanished. She sat up straight, her crimson blazer suddenly looking less like a power suit and more like a target. "This is absurd," Marcus hissed, leaning toward his lawyer. "Fix this." "Your Honor." Sterling continued, his voice gaining a steely edge. "Mr. Thorne claims his wife was a liability. He claims she is shy. He claims she is weak. We intend to prove that Mr. Thorne's success is not only built on sand, but that he has been stealing the sand from his own backyard." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Those are serious accusations, Mr. Sterling. I hope you have more than routing numbers." "Oh, we have much more," Sterling said, finally looking at Marcus. "We have the truth." Marcus glared at Mira. For the first time all morning, she lifted her head. Her eyes were dry, clear, and terrifyingly calm. She looked at Marcus, then shifted her gaze past him to Jessica. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at them with the cold detachment of a scientist examining bacteria in a petri dish. "Recess until 100 p.m., Judge Pendleton announced, banging the gavel. As the room cleared, Marcus shot up and buttoned his jacket aggressively. He leaned over the table toward Mira. "You think a cheap lawyer and some fake documents are going to scare me?" Elle, Marcus whispered venomously. I'm a director at Stratton. I have power you can't even comprehend. Take the 50 grand and disappear, or I will destroy you. Mira didn't answer. She simply packed her pen into her bag. It was Jessica who made the move. As Mira walked toward the exit, Jessica blocked her path in the center aisle. The mistress stood tall in her heels, looking down at Mira's flat shoes. You really are pathetic. Jessica sneered, her voice dripping with faux pity. Marcus told me how you freeze up at parties, how you can't even order dinner for yourself. Look at you, you're shaking. Mira wasn't shaking, but Jessica wanted to believe she was. He needs a woman, Mira. Jessica continued, stepping closer, invading her personal space. A real woman. Someone who can stand next to a CEO, not a little girl who hides in the corner. You're doing him a favor by letting him go. Stratton Dynamics needs a face, and let's be honest, honey. Yours is too plain for the brochure. Jessica laughed a cruel, tinkling sound. Go back to your books and your cats. Leave the business world to the adults. Mira paused. She looked at Jessica's red lips, then at the frantic way Marcus was whispering to Sneed in the corner. Excuse me, Mira said. Her voice was soft, melodic, and incredibly polite. Oh, did I hurt your feelings? Jessica mocked. No, Mira said, stepping around her. You're standing on my coat. As Mira walked out of the courtroom, Robert Sterling fell into step beside her. Did she take the bait? Sterling asked quietly. Hook, line, and sinker, Mira replied. Her voice was no longer the whisper of a shy housewife. It was the cool, commanded tone of an executive. They have no idea who signed Marcus's promotion letter last year, do they? No, ma'am, Sterling smiled. They think the CEO of Vance Global, the parent company of Stratton Dynamics, is a recluse named E.J. Vance who lives in Switzerland. Mira adjusted her simple grey dress. Let them think that for one more hour. I want to hear him lie under oath first. The courthouse cafeteria was a depressing affair of plastic chairs and vending machines, but Marcus Thorne and Jessica Miller were in high spirits. They sat at a corner table, huddled over 2 coffees. Did you see her lawyer? Jessica giggled, scrolling through her phone. He looks like he belongs in a dusty library. Sneed is going to eat him alive. Marcus loosened his tie, taking a sip of black coffee. Sneed is worried about the Cayman accounts. I told him I covered my tracks, but Mira, she must have been going through my home office. Does it matter? Jessica reached out and stroked his hand. Even if they find a little extra cash, you're the one bringing in the millions. Stratton grew 40% this year because of your supply chain restructuring. The judge sees that. You're the golden goose. She's just the dead weight. Marcus nodded, his ego stroked. You're right. I made that company what it is. The board loves me. Hell, I'm expecting a tap for the VP role next quarter. Once I drop Mira, I'll have the image to match the title. He looked at Jessica appreciatively. This was what he wanted. Flash, confidence, someone who looked good on his arm at the galas. Mira had always hated the galas. She would stand by the buffet, clutching a glass of water, refusing to schmooze with the investors. Marcus found it infuriating. He needed a partner who could charm, manipulate, and conquer, like Jessica. What did you say to her in the aisle? Marcus asked, grinning. I told her the truth, Jessica smirked, that she's too shy for the big leagues, that the CEO's wife needs to be a lioness, not a mouse. Marcus laughed. She probably went to the bathroom to cry. Across town, in a sleek, soundproofed office inside a glass skyscraper, the scene was very different. Mira Vance was not crying in a bathroom. She was standing at a window overlooking the city skyline, a phone pressed to her ear. The office was minimalist and imposing. The name on the frosted glass door read, E.J. Vance, Chairman of the Board. "Yes, Richard," Mira said into the phone. Her voice was crisp. "I need the forensic audit on the logistics division of Stratton Dynamics, finalized by 2:00 p.m. On the other end of the line was Richard Halloway, the chief financial officer of Vance Global. Vance Global was a massive conglomerate that owned shipping lines, tech firms, and pharmaceutical labs. Stratton Dynamics was just one of their many subsidiaries, a mid-sized logistics arm that they had acquired 5 years ago. "We have the data, Mira," Richard said. It's worse than we thought. He wasn't just hiding assets from you. He was cooking the books at Stratton to inflate his bonus structure. He's been routing phantom shipments through a shell company in Nevada." Mira's eyes narrowed. "Phantom shipments?" "Yes. He bills the parent company us for logistics services that never happen. Then he pays the vendor, which is actually his own shell company. He's stolen about $3 million from the company in the last 18 months. Mira let out a long, slow breath. "So he's not just a cheater. He's an embezzler." "Correct. And Mira, if this comes out in court, the stock price for Stratton will take a hit." "Let it take a hit," Mira said coldly. "I can rebuild Stratton. I cannot rebuild my dignity if I let him walk away thinking he's smarter than me." "Are you sure you want to do this in the divorce court?" Richard asked. "We could handle this internally. Fire him quietly." "No." Mira turned away from the window. She caught her reflection in the glass. She didn't look like the mouse Marcus thought she was. She looked like her father, the man who had built this empire from dirt. "He dragged me into public court to humiliate me. He brought his mistress to laugh at me. He wants a show, I'll give him a finale." "Understood," Richard said. "I'm emailing the files to Robert Sterling now." Mira hung up. She looked at the clock. 12:15 p.m. She walked over to a locked cabinet in her office. Inside hung a garment bag. She unzipped it. Inside was not a grey, shapeless dress. It was a sharp, tailored white power suit, Yves Saint Laurent. It was the kind of suit a woman wore when she was about to acquire a country or destroy a man. She ran her hand over the fabric, then zipped it back up. Not yet, she told herself. Part 3 needs the mouse costume. She had to play the part for just a little longer. She needed Marcus to testify. She needed him to say on the record under penalty of perjury that he was the sole reason for the company's success. She needed him to claim full responsibility for Stratton Dynamics. Because once he claimed the success, he also claimed the crime. At 1:00 p.m., the court reconvened. The air was heavier now. The sun had moved, casting long shadows across the defense table. Marcus was back in the witness box. Sneed was pacing in front of him. "Mr. Thorne," Sneed asked, playing to the gallery, "can you describe your role at Stratton Dynamics?" Marcus sat up straight, adjusting his cuffs. "I am the regional director. I oversee all supply chain logistics for the Northeast Corridor. When I took over, the division was failing. I turned it around. I implemented new strategies, cut dead weight, and tripled our revenue." "And your wife?" Sneed asked. "Did she assist in this strategy?" Marcus chuckled. No, Mira doesn't understand business. She finds it overwhelming. She prefers to stay home and garden. She doesn't even know the names of my biggest clients. I tried to explain the corporate structure to her once, and she looked like a deer in headlights." In the gallery, Jessica covered her mouth to hide a laugh. "So it is fair to say, Saul, Sneed concluded that the accumulation of wealth during your marriage was entirely due to your intellect and effort. 100%, Marcus said firmly. And you have disclosed all assets related to this success. I have. My life is an open book. Robert Sterling stood up. He didn't look like a sleepy old man anymore. He picked up a thick stack of papers that had just been delivered by courier. The ink was still fresh. Your witness, Sneed said dismissively, sitting down. Sterling walked to the podium. He placed the stack of papers down with a heavy thud. Mr. Thorne, Sterling began, his voice deceptively polite. You work for Stratton Dynamics. Are you aware of who owns Stratton Dynamics? Marcus rolled his eyes. Of course. It's a subsidiary of Vance Global. Correct. A massive international conglomerate. Have you ever met the chairman of Vance Global? No, Marcus scoffed. E.J. Vance is a ghost. Nobody sees him. He runs things from Europe. But my numbers are so good, he leaves me alone. E.J. Vance, Sterling repeated. Interesting initials. Tell me, Mr. Thorne, what is your wife's middle name? Marcus paused. He frowned. He looked at Mira, who was staring at her hands. Jane, Marcus said. Mira Jane Vance. Why? And her maiden name, Vance. We have the same last name. It's a coincidence. A common name. Is it? Sterling smiled. It was a shark's smile. So you believe it is a coincidence that your wife, Mira Jane Vance, shares a name with the reclusive owner of your parent company, E.J. Vance. The room went silent. Marcus blinked. He looked at the judge. He looked at Sneed. Sneed was no longer smiling. He was frantically flipping through a file. What are you getting at? Marcus demanded, his voice rising. My wife is a housewife. She's nobody. Mr. Thorne, Sterling said, picking up the top document. I am going to show you Exhibit C. It is the incorporation deed for Vance Global dated 30 years ago, and Exhibit D, the transfer of ownership deed dated 6 years ago, 2 months before your wedding. Sterling walked the papers over to the witness box. Marcus snatched them. His eyes scanned the legal jargon. His face went pale. Then it went grey. Read the highlighted line, please, Sterling commanded. Marcus's voice shook. Ownership transferred solely to Mira J. Vance. Louder, please, for the record, Sterling said. Mira J. Vance, Marcus whispered. He looked up, horrified. He looked at the mouse at the table. Mira slowly lifted her head. She locked eyes with Marcus. And then, for the first time in years, she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. She's not just a housewife, Mr. Thorne, Sterling boomed, turning to the gallery where Jessica sat with her mouth open. She is the CEO of the parent company that signs your paychecks. She is the chairman of the board. She is your boss. That's impossible, Jessica screamed from the gallery, standing up. She's shy. She can't even order a pizza. Sit down, Ms. Miller. The judge banged his gavel. One more outburst, and you will be held in contempt. It's a lie, Marcus stammered. She never told me this is entrapment. She lied to me. She didn't lie, Sterling corrected. She just never mentioned work at home. Because you never asked. You were too busy explaining business to her. Tell me, Mr. Thorne, do you recall explaining supply chain synergy to the woman who owns the shipping fleet you use? Marcus was hyperventilating. But that's not the worst part, Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. He picked up the second stack of papers, the forensic audit. Since Mrs. Vance is the owner of the company, any theft from the company is in essence theft from her personal estate. And since you just admitted under oath that you take full responsibility for Stratton's finances, Sterling dropped the audit report on the railing of the witness box. Can you explain why Stratton Dynamics has paid $3.2 million to a consulting firm registered to a Jessica Miller in the last 2 years? Every head in the courtroom turned to Jessica. She froze her crimson blazer, suddenly feeling like a prison uniform. The silence in courtroom 4B was shattered by the sound of Clifford Sneed Marcus's bulldog lawyer slamming his file shut. The confident smirk that had plastered Sneed's face all morning was gone, replaced by the frantic, sweaty sheen of a man realizing his career was about to implode. "Your Honor," Sneed stammered, stepping away from his client as if Marcus were radioactive. I must request a recess. I was not made aware of any criminal implications regarding Stratton Dynamics. I was hired to litigate a divorce, not defend against grand larceny." "Sit down, Mr. Sneed." Judge Pendleton barked his eyes like flint. "Nobody is going anywhere. The bailiff will secure the doors. If there is evidence of felony fraud being presented in my courtroom, we are going to hear it right now." Marcus Thorne sat slumped in the witness box, looking like a man who had been punched in the gut. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. He looked at Mira, desperate for a sign of the timid, submissive woman he had married. He wanted her to look down. He wanted her to wring her hands. But Mira was looking at him with an expression of absolute boredom. "Mr. Thorne," Robert Sterling continued, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Let's discuss Miller Consulting. You authorized 24 separate payments to this vendor over the last 18 months. What services did Ms. Miller provide to a global logistics firm?" Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Jessica in the gallery. Jessica stood up, her face a mask of panic. I did consulting, lifestyle consulting for the executives." "Sit down," the bailiff warned, moving toward her. Sterling ignored her and pulled another sheet of paper from the stack. "Interesting, because according to the invoices Marcus signed, Miller Consulting provided heavy freight optimization and maritime fuel auditing. Ms. Miller, do you have a degree in maritime logistics?" Jessica froze. The gallery murmured. "I didn't think so," Sterling said dryly. "Marcus, look at Exhibit G. This is a bank statement for Miller Consulting. It shows that within 24 hours of receiving payment from Stratton Dynamics, 40% of the funds were transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account held by Blue River LLC. Sterling paused for effect, walking closer to the witness box. "And who is the sole signatory of Blue River LLC?" Marcus closed his eyes. "I am." The trap snapped shut. "So," Sterling concluded, pacing before the judge, "you used your mistress's fake company to invoice your wife's company for work that was never done. Then split the stolen money with your mistress. Is that a fair summary of your business genius, Mr. Thorne?" "It wasn't stealing." Marcus shouted, his composure finally shattering. "I earned that money. I brought in millions. I deserved a bigger bonus. The board wouldn't approve it, so I took what was mine." "You took what belonged to the shareholders," Sterling corrected, "and the majority shareholder is the woman you just tried to bully out of her own home." Marcus looked wildly at Sneed. "Do something. Object." Sneed stood up, but instead of objecting, he began packing his briefcase. "Your Honor, in light of my client's admission of guilt under oath regarding federal wire fraud, I must recuse myself. I cannot suborn perjury, and he just confessed to a crime I knew nothing about." "You can't leave me," Marcus screamed. "Watch me." Sneed muttered, snapping his briefcase shut. But the real drama was happening in the gallery. Jessica Miller, realizing the ship was sinking, decided she wasn't going to drown with the captain. "He made me do it," Jessica shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Marcus. "I didn't know it was illegal. He told me it was a tax loop. He said he was the CEO effectively, and that he had permission. He used me." Marcus turned on her, his face twisting in rage. "You lying leech. You begged for that money. You said the condo in Manhattan wasn't enough. You wanted the Porsche. You said, cook the books, Marcus, nobody reads them. You said his wife was stupid." "Ooh, Sasa," Jessica yelled back, tears streaming down her face, though they looked more like tears of fear than remorse. "You said she was a brain-dead housewife who wouldn't notice if the house burned down. How was I supposed to know she was the chairman of the board?" "Enough!" Judge Pendleton roared, banging the gavel so hard the wooden base cracked. "Bailiff, take Ms. Miller into custody for potential conspiracy. Mr. Thorne, you are to remain in the witness box. We are notifying the district attorney's office." 2 officers moved toward Jessica. She kicked and screamed her power suit, now just a costume for a common criminal. "Mira, Mira, help me. I'm a woman just like you. He manipulated us both." Mira didn't even blink. She watched Jessica get dragged out the side door with the dispassionate interest of someone watching a garbage truck collect the weekly refuse. Then she stood up. "Mr. Sterling," Mira said clearly. Her voice carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "I would like to address the court. Mrs. Vance." The judge said, his tone noticeably more respectful than it had been an hour ago. "You are not under oath, but given the circumstances, please proceed." Mira walked out from behind the defense table. She didn't walk to the witness box. She walked to the center of the room, standing directly between Marcus and the exit. The transformation was complete. The slump in her shoulders was gone. Her chin was high. The shy Mira, who stuttered at dinner parties, had evaporated. In her place stood E.J. Vance, the woman who negotiated trade deals with nations. She looked at Marcus. He was trembling. "You want to know why I was shy, Marcus?" Mira asked softly. The room was deadly silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second to look at Mira. Marcus looked at her, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Please, we can fix this. I'm your husband." "You asked why I was shy," Mira repeated, ignoring his plea. She paced slowly, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. "I wasn't shy, Marcus. I was careful." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, my father founded Vance Global. I grew up in boardrooms. I learned to read balance sheets before I learned to ride a bike. But I also learned something else. Men like Marcus don't want a partner. They want an audience." She turned back to Marcus. "When we met 6 years ago, I was tired. I was tired of men trying to date me for my portfolio. I was tired of suitors who Googled my net worth before they asked for my last name. So when I met you, a mid-level manager with ambition, I decided to run a test. I introduced myself as Mira. Just Mira. A quiet, supportive woman who wanted a simple life." Marcus swallowed hard. I loved you, Mira. In the beginning." "You loved the reflection of yourself in my eyes," Mira corrected sharply. "You loved that I listened to you brag for hours about your strategies. You loved that I never corrected you when you were wrong about market trends. You loved that I made you feel big by making myself look small." She took a step closer to the witness box. Marcus shrank back. I gave you everything, Marcus. I gave you a home. I paid off your student loans anonymously, of course. You thought it was a federal grant error. It wasn't. It was me. And when you applied for the director job at Stratton, you didn't get that on merit. You were fourth in line. I made the call. I put you there because I wanted to see if you could rise to the occasion. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. You got me the promotion. I gave you the kingdom. Mira said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. And all you had to do was be a decent man, honest, loyal, kind. She gestured to the empty seat where Jessica had been sitting. But you got bored. The shy wife wasn't enough for your ego. You needed someone flashy, someone who would help. You spend the money you thought you were earning, and when you realized your salary wasn't enough to impress your mistress, you decided to steal from my company. Mira walked back to her table and picked up a document. It wasn't a legal filing. It was a glossy photograph. Do you know what this is, Marcus? She held it up. It was a picture of Marcus and Jessica on a yacht in the Mediterranean. That was taken 3 months ago, Marcus whispered. Yes, on the Vance Global Corporate Yacht, Mira said. You booked it under the company account. You told the captain you were inspecting the maritime assets. The captain is my godfather. He called me 5 minutes after you boarded. He asked me, Mira, why is your husband here with a woman who is drinking champagne out of the bottle? Marcus buried his face in his hands. I have known for 3 months, Mira said. I watched you. I let you dig your hole. I waited for you to file for divorce. I wanted to see if you would have the decency to offer me a fair settlement. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'll feel guilty. Maybe he'll leave me the house and go quietly. She threw the photo onto the floor. But you didn't. You got greedy. You wanted to strip me bare. You wanted to kick the shy mouse into the street so you could move your mistress into my bed. You mocked me. You sneered at me. You underestimated me. Mira turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense rests. We have no further questions for this employee. Employee? Marcus looked up, tears in his eyes. Mira, don't do this. I'll go to jail. Yes, Mira said simply. You will. And while you are there, you will have plenty of time to think about the irony. What irony? Marcus croaked. Mira leaned in her face, inches from the wooden railing. The board voted last week, Marcus. We were looking for a new CEO for the entire North American division. My father wanted an outsider, but I fought for you. I told them Marcus Thorne has potential. I was going to tell you tonight. I was going to reveal everything. I was going to hand you an empire. Marcus's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. You were going to make me CEO. I was going to give you the world, Mira said, standing up straight and smoothing her dress. But you were too busy stealing crumbs to notice. She turned her back on him. Mr. Sterling, she said to her lawyer, I believe we are done here. Please ensure the district attorney has the full unredacted audit. Mira! Marcus screamed as the bailiffs moved in to detain him. Mira, please, I love you. It was a mistake. She meant nothing. Mira didn't stop. She didn't look back. She walked toward the double doors of the courtroom. The shy wife had left the building. The CEO had work to do. The morning after the trial, the sun rose over Manhattan, but for Marcus Thorne, the world remained grey. He wasn't waking up in the 800-thread count Egyptian cotton sheets of his Greenwich estate. He was waking up on a thin, plastic-covered mattress in a holding cell at the Manhattan Detention Complex, affectionately known as the Tombs. He had been denied bail due to significant flight risk, a decision heavily influenced by Robert Sterling's submission of Marcus's browser history, which included searches for non-extradition countries like the Maldives and Montenegro. Meanwhile, 50 floors up in the Vance global headquarters on Wall Street, Mira Vance was fighting a different kind of battle. The elevator doors slid open to the executive floor. Mira stepped out, flanked by security, and Richard Halloway, her CFO. She wasn't wearing the grey dress anymore. She wore a bespoke black suit from Armani, her hair loose and sharp around her face. The office was in chaos. The news of Marcus's arrest and the revelation of Mira's true identity had hit the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg like a meteor. The stock price of Stratton Dynamics had wobbled, dipping 4% in pre-market trading. Mira walked past the rows of cubicles. The whispering stopped instantly. Employees who had once ignored the boss's shy wife when she visited Marcus and now stared at her with a mixture of awe and terror. "Richard," Mira said, not breaking her stride, "I want every single person Marcus hired in the last 12 months audited. If they bought so much as a paperclip without a receipt, I want them gone." "Already started," Richard replied, checking his tablet. "But Mira, the board of directors, is waiting in the conference room. They aren't happy. The stock dip has them spooked. Old man Galloway is calling for a vote of no confidence. He says your marital drama has compromised the company's integrity." Mira stopped. She turned to Richard, her eyes cold. "Galloway said that he did. He's rallying the other members. They think you let this go on too long. They think you were emotional." Mira smiled. It was the same dangerous smile she had worn in the courtroom. "Good. I've been wanting to retire Galloway for years. He just gave me the excuse." She pushed open the double doors of the boardroom. 12 men and 2 women sat around the massive oak table. The air was thick with tension. At the head of the table sat Thomas Galloway, a 70-year-old relic of the old corporate world, who had always viewed Mira as her father's daughter, not a leader in her own right. "Mira," Galloway said without standing up, "we have a crisis. The press is calling this a soap opera. Stratton is bleeding credibility. The board feels that you should step down as chairman temporarily until this mess is resolved. We need a leader who isn't distracted by a cheating husband." Mira didn't sit down. She walked to the head of the table, standing directly behind Galloway's chair. She placed her hands on the back of it. "Distracted," Mira repeated. "Thomas, do you know why the stock only dropped Because the market hasn't fully reacted yet," Galloway snapped. "No," Mira said. "It dropped was because at 600 a.m. this morning, I announced that Vance Global is acquiring Meridian Logistics, our largest competitor in the Pacific. I closed the deal while you were still sleeping, Thomas." The room went silent. Meridian Logistics was a whale. Acquiring them would double their market share. "I used the liquidity from Marcus's seized assets, which I legally recovered this morning, to cover the down payment on the merger." Mira continued, her voice steady. "The market loves a shark, Thomas. By noon, when the merger news cycles over the divorce news, our stock will be up 10%. She walked around the table, making eye contact with every board member. "I didn't let this go on too long because I was emotional. I let it go on until I had enough leverage to clean house. Marcus was the symptom. The disease was a lack of oversight in the subsidiary division's oversight that you, the board, were supposed to provide." She stopped in front of Galloway. "You want a vote of no confidence? Go ahead. But remember, I own 51% of the voting shares. If you call for a vote, the only person leaving this building today is you." Galloway turned red, then pale. He looked at the other board members. None of them would meet his eye. They realized the power dynamic had shifted. The mouse was gone. The lion was eating. "I expect your resignation by the end of the day, Thomas," Mira said softly. "You can cite health reasons. It looks better for your legacy." Mira turned to the rest of the room. "Now let's discuss the rebranding of Stratton Dynamics. I'm thinking of scrubbing the name entirely. Any suggestions?" While Marcus rotted in jail and Myra reconquered her boardroom, Jessica Miller was living a nightmare of a different variety. She had managed to post bail using the last of the money she had hidden in a safe deposit box that the forensic accountants hadn't found yet. It was 50,000, nearly everything she had left. She walked out of the precinct, expecting cameras ready to spin her story. She had rehearsed it in the cell I was a victim to. Marcus groomed me. I'm just a young girl from Ohio who got swept up by a powerful man. But there were no cameras, no paparazzi. Just a grey, rainy street. She checked her phone. Her Instagram account, which had 50,000 followers and was her main source of validation, was gone. "Account suspended for violation of terms of service." "What?" she shrieked, tapping the screen. "No, that's my brand." She tried to log into TikTok. Banned. Twitter. Suspended. Mira hadn't just sued her. She had utilized the scorched earth policy of Vance Global's legal department to issue takedown notices for every platform, citing dissemination of criminal activity and harassment. Jessica had been digitally erased. Desperate, she hailed a cab to her apartment on the Upper East Side. The doorman, a man named Henry, who she usually flirted with to get packages, carried up, blocked the entrance. "Ms. Miller," Henry said stiffly, "you can't go up." "What do you mean I live here?" Jessica snapped. "Move, Henry." "The lease was in Mr. Thorne's name, paid for by Stratton Dynamics Corporate Housing," Henry recited from a clipboard. "The lease was terminated at 9:00 a.m. this morning. The locks have been changed. Your personal effects have been placed in storage in Queens." "Queens," Jessica gasped. "My vintage Chanel bags are in there, my Louboutins." "I believe the storage facility is not climate-controlled," Henry added with a hint of satisfaction. "You have 48 hours to retrieve them before they are auctioned." Jessica stood on the sidewalk, rain soaking her cheap prison-release sweats. She was homeless. She was offline. But she still had one card to play. The gala. Tonight was the Metropolitan Children's Hospital benefit at the Pierre Hotel. It was the event of the season. Jessica knew that Marcus had bought a table for Stratton Dynamics months ago. Her name was on the list as his associate. If she could get in, she could find a reporter. Page 6 would be there. TMZ. If she could just tell her side of the story, sell the interview, she could get enough money to flee to Mexico. She went to a cheap motel, used her last credit card, which miraculously hadn't been declined yet, to buy a dress from a department store off the rack, and spent 3 hours doing her makeup. She had to look like a victim, but a beautiful one. At 8:00 p.m., she arrived at the Pierre. The flashbulbs were blinding. Limousines were dropping off senators, celebrities, and titans of industry. Jessica walked toward the entrance head high. She approached the check-in desk where a severe-looking woman with an iPad was managing the list. "Name?" the woman asked. "Jessica Miller," she said confidently. "I'm with the Stratton Dynamics table." The woman scrolled. She stopped. She looked up at Jessica, then signaled to a large man in a black suit standing by the velvet rope. "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller. That table was rescinded." "Rescinded? That's impossible. Marcus paid for it." "The table was repurchased," a voice said from behind her. Jessica turned around. Mira Vance stood at the top of the stairs. She looked like royalty. She was wearing a deep emerald gown by Oscar de la Renta that shimmered like dragon scales. Around her neck was the Vance diamond, a family heirloom worth more than the entire building they were standing in. Next to Mira was not a lawyer, but Julian Banks, the handsome 30-something CEO of Meridian Logistics, her new partner. "Mira," Jessica breathed. She saw the cameras turning toward them. This was her chance. She threw herself into the role. "Mira," she cried out, trying to summon tears. "Please, you have to help me. I have nowhere to go." "Marcus lied to me too. We're both victims here." The paparazzi went wild. Flash, 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 Mira descended the stairs, slowly stopping 2 steps above Jessica. The height difference made Jessica look like a child. "We are not both victims, Jessica," Mira said, her voice calm and perfectly audible to the press. "I was a victim of betrayal. You were an accomplice to theft. There is a difference." "I'm homeless," Jessica sobbed, reaching out to grab Mira's hand. Security intercepted her arm instantly. "You aren't homeless because of me," Mira said, stepping back. "You are homeless because you spent 2 years living on money that wasn't yours. You bought purses instead of property. You bought status instead of security. And now the bill has come due." "I'll sell my story," Jessica screamed, dropping the act as the security guard began to drag her away. "I'll tell everyone you're a cold-hearted witch. I'll tell Vanity Fair." Mira laughed. It was a genuine, amused laugh. "Jessica," Mira said, shaking her head. "Who do you think owns the publishing house that prints Vanity Fair?" Jessica's eyes went wide. "I bought a controlling stake in the media group this afternoon," Mira whispered, leaning down. "Nobody is going to print your story. You are ghosted. Permanently." "Get her out of here," Mira signaled to the guards. As Jessica was dragged kicking and screaming away from the red carpet, looking like a lunatic in a cheap dress, Mira turned to the cameras. She adjusted her diamond necklace, smiled the smile of a woman who had won everything, and took Julian Banks's arm. "Shall we go in?" Mira asked. "After you, Madame Chairman," Julian said respectfully. The heavy doors of the Pierre closed, shutting out the rain, and the screaming mistress leaving Mira in the warmth of the world she ruled. 6 months later, the seasons had changed. The humid heat of the city had turned into a biting, frost-covered winter. But inside the Federal Correctional Institution at Otisville, the temperature was always the same, cold, sterile, and smelling of industrial cleaner. Marcus Thorne sat in the visitors' room. He had aged 10 years in 6 months. His bespoke Italian suits were gone, replaced by a khaki jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. The arrogance that had defined his face in divorce court was completely erased, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He wasn't waiting for Jessica. Jessica was currently serving 18 months in a minimum security facility in Connecticut, working in the laundry detail. She had tried to write to him once, blaming him for ruining her life. He hadn't written back. He was waiting for his lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Henderson, who looked overworked and underpaid. "Bad news, Marcus," Henderson said, sitting down and not bothering to open his briefcase. "Did the appeal go through?" Marcus asked, his voice raspy. "Did they reduce the sentence?" "No." Henderson sighed. The judge cited the breach of fiduciary trust and the sheer scale of the embezzlement. "The 10-year sentence stands. You'll be eligible for parole in 7. Marcus put his head in his hands. 7 years. He would be 45 when he got out. He would have nothing. No career, no reputation, no money. "But there's something else," Henderson said, sliding a single envelope across the metal table. "This arrived at my office this morning. It's from Vance Global Legal." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Was it Mira? Was she finally reaching out? Maybe she had forgiven him. Maybe she was going to offer him a lifeline. He tore the envelope open with trembling hands. Inside, there was no letter, no handwritten note. There was only a glossy brochure and a clipping from the Financial Times. The headline read, "Vance Global Shatters Earnings Records. CEO Mira Vance, named Businesswoman of the Year." Marcus stared at the photo. Mira looked radiant. She was standing on the deck of the corporate yacht, the same one he had used for his affair, holding a glass of champagne. Next to her was Julian Banks, the former competitor she had acquired. He wasn't just standing next to her. His hand was resting possessively, protectively on the small of her back, and Mira was leaning into him. But it was the brochure that crushed him. It was a prospectus for a new charity foundation launched by Vance Global, the Thorn Initiative, a grant for financial literacy and ethics. He read the fine print, funded entirely by the recovered assets of former director Marcus Thorn. This program is dedicated to teaching underprivileged youth the importance of honesty, integrity, and hard work, ensuring they do not make the mistakes of the past. She had named a charity after him. She was using the money he stole to teach children how not to be like him. "She turned me into a lesson," Marcus whispered, tears dropping onto the paper. "She erased my legacy and replaced it with a warning label." "It's ironic," Henderson muttered, packing up. "She's quite the strategist. You know they say the stock price doubled the day after your sentencing." Marcus stared at the photo of Mira one last time. The shy girl who used to be afraid to order dinner. The woman he had mocked for being boring. He realized now that her silence hadn't been emptiness. It had been depth, and he had drowned in it. "Time to go, Thorn," the guard grunted, tapping his baton on the door. Marcus stood up. He left the brochure on the table. He didn't want it. He walked back toward his cell, the heavy metal door clanging shut behind him, with a sound of finality that echoed like a gavel. Outside in the crisp winter air of Manhattan, Mira Vance stepped out of her town car. Julian held an umbrella over her head to shield her from the falling snow. "Did you send it?" Julian asked softly. "I did," Mira replied, adjusting her gloves. "Do you think he'll read it?" "It doesn't matter," Mira said, looking up at the skyscraper that bore her name. "The past is a reference point, Julian, not a residence. I don't live there anymore." She took his arm, and together they walked into the warmth of the lobby, leaving the cold and Marcus far behind in the shadows. And that is the story of how a man tried to break a woman he deemed weak, only to find out she was the one holding the sledgehammer. Marcus and Jessica made the fatal mistake that so many arrogant people make. They confused kindness with stupidity and silence with submission. Mira Vance proved that you don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes the loudest move you can make is signing a document that destroys your enemies without you ever raising your voice. In the end, Marcus got exactly what he wanted, a life where he didn't have to worry about a shy wife holding him back. Unfortunately for him, he'll be living that life in a 6x8 concrete cell, while Mira rules the empire he was too greedy to inherit. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes corporate revenge and ultimate karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Mira's shoes? Would you have sent the letter to prison or just ignored him completely? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about betrayed spouses, taking back their power, and serving ice-cold justice, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a drama. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They're usually the ones planning the checkmate. See you in the next video.